Hello and welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Allenwyma. Today we are back with our good friend Victor. Victor, the creator of Serverpod. How have you been?
I've been very well, thank you. Thanks for having me back on your show.
Yes. You're one of the few returning guests, right? We don't have a lot, but I think of course the ones that we bring back is people that we really like and they have more to share than just the initial topic, right? But this is kind of an update on Serverpod, as we talked about.
Yeah, so I guess a lot have happened since we spoke last time. So it's more of a complete product. We have a whole bunch of people actually using it now, and we're getting ready for a 1.0 release in January. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of good that I think with how do I say this? There's kind of a lot to say because Serverpod is kind of like battle tested against you're working at it's called Buzz, right? I forgot the full name.
Yeah, so that's one startup here. I'm based in Stockholm, and so are they. So they used Serverpod to build their app. They have actually done a little bit of a pivot, and it's now a really cool tool for developers. So it's basically connects with GitHub and Slack and the different tools you use as a developer, and then it basically helps you connect your team if you're working on a project, so you can see the pull requests you need to review, and it lives in your menu bar on your Mac. So it's very easy to get to it, and you directly see like the list of tasks that you have for your day and what your teammates are up to and stuff like that. So I think they did a really good job, and it's all using Serverpod and the real-time capabilities of Serverpod. Um, yeah, so I mean, it's free to check out. So go to joinbus.com/devs if you want to try it out. I think it's pretty cool and a great example of what you can do with Serverpod. Sorry.
Well, I forgot what the heck my question was because I'm running late. So for you guys at home or if you're watching the show, I'm a little bit what do you call it? Scrambling around because I had a meeting that ran half hour over than it should have, so I didn't have the time to hook up everything and made poor Victor wait and everybody who wanted to watch the live stream wait. So I think we used to have 4 people waiting and then we went down to 2. So I'm guessing 2 people got frustrated and left, and I apologize. It's my fault.
I'm sure they'll listen in later.
Yeah, no, I hope that they come back and they forgive me. But yeah, sometimes life is like that. If only everything worked the way it should work, then life would just be much easier. But then it wouldn't be fun, right? It's kind of fun to throw, challenges at yourself, right? I mean, you basically
Right.
threw quite a big project because we had Aqueduct, right? And then that one went defunct,
Yeah.
sadly. And then you stepped up and started working on Serverpod, and I think you realized you probably had a lot of issues in the beginning, like, oh, how do I do this? How do I do that? This kind of thoughts kind of came up, I think, right?
Yeah. Right. So I think for a project like Serverpod, the sort of basics are not that difficult, but then there are all the little quirks and things that may not work exactly as you like it. There are like subtle differences between Flutter on the web, for instance, and how that works with communication and what you use with Dart.io. So uh, a lot of the work has just been to overcome all these issues, and basically if you're like a connection that's connected all the time, detect when that goes down and be able to reconnect, and that will work a little bit different on actually the web and uh, in apps or native code. So there have been a lot of those kind of things that I didn't quite foresee when I started the Serverpod project. You think you have everything working, and then you throw something new on it, like Flutter Web or um, things like, I guess, just updates to different packages. Also, a little bit of a challenge to keep up with all the authentication libraries and stuff like that.
Yeah, and actually well, I guess you didn't run into this problem, right? I talked to do you play around with Rust or no?
I have not, no.
Okay, there's very basically everybody like how everybody builds upon Shelf for their HTTP solution.
Yeah,
Everybody builds upon Hyper for
okay.
Rust, right? similar to like Rack for Ruby to a certain extent. And the guy who wrote Hyper, we were having a conversation, and he was just talking about how complicated everything is because if you read the spec, it say it should do something should do this, but it's not always doing that. So you have a lot of kind of like digital duct tape everywhere, kind of handling all these weird cases that are
Yeah,
that are the unstandard standard, if that makes sense.
right. Yeah, I feel like a lot of that sort of research that you need to do, you need to get into actually reading the source code for Flutter or for the different packages you're working with, and many times you actually have to modify them and send pull requests to the maintainers and hope they include it in the real library.
So I think there's a term for that. That's called yak shaving, right? Where you try to do one thing, and then you end up doing other things that aren't the thing that you wanted to do initially, right?
Right. So, but I figured, I mean, it's a win for the whole community, right? For anyone who wants to use Dart as a server language, uh, doing those contributions. And that's kind of what I like with the open source community. It's so many people helping out. I got some great additions to Serverpod from people in the community. I mean, they must spend months on some of those changes that they've made. And many times it's not possible to just take them and they will work, but it can be a great push in the right direction, and also worth the work of getting them integrated into the product, which makes it much better. So I'm super thankful to everyone that's contributed to Serverpod. It's a whole bunch of people now, and they're like updates coming almost every day. So that's really cool to see.
So it's no longer just you kind of doing a lot of the work. Now you have your fans out there that are pushing features and fixing bugs, etc. Right?
Oh yeah, and I'm actually building a whole team with like full-time developers around Serverpod. So I have funding now. I can't go too much into the details, but there's money to drive this project forward. There will be much more information together with the actual 1.0 release when that's coming. So I can't give away all of that right now, but yeah. So if there's someone out there who want to tag along and be full time on the Serverpod team and are a great Dart Flutter developer, I'd love to speak with you. Basically, doing a little shout out here.
A call for action, right? No, I think didn't you confuse me initially as an investor? I think that was you, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, I remember it was somebody. I talked to a couple people and they were talking about investment, and so I think it's you and somebody else did this to me also. I don't. Is it my name or something?
Yeah, I mean, your name is very, very similar to one of my investors' names. So,
Even the last name is similar.
yeah, I think so.
Wow.
So that's why I confused you, because I mean, I've been speaking with a lot of investors, so
Okay.
I thought it was one of them that wrote to me when you asked me for like an update. And then I realized
Okay.
right when I answered you, like, oh no, that's
That's the other guy.
yeah, you're the Flutter guy. That was a while ago.
I'm not the money guy. I'm the flutter guy. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that it's good to hear that my name is associated with that, but it's kind of funny. I don't know. Like, I wonder if he also has a similar phone number as me because a couple years ago I kept getting calls to like do investment, and I was like, what is this? And then they were calling me and they were like, hi sir, we'd like to know if you want to buy this NBA team. I forgot the name of the team. I think I still have the voicemail somewhere on my Google Voice number. I was like, this is very weird. Like, there must be somebody who has a phone number very similar to mine because I get very weird calls about attending like political business luncheons where they're like, "Oh, this dinner this lunch we want to invite you with is $40,000 a plate, and you'll get to rub elbows with, I don't know, some I forgot who it is, some politician." So I
Or
not
they're
maybe,
scammers.
yeah, or I don't know, it could be, but like if you get so many of them and they're different, it can't be all the same scam, right? I must have a number that's similar to a rich guy, and then now I have a name that's similar to a rich guy, and another, like I said, another guy in the community also, not Flutter community, in the Rust community. I reached out to him to come back onto the show. He also thought I was an investor. So that's like maybe it's the same guy who's investing into like these kind of open source projects in different spaces.
Could be.
Yeah, that's crazy. But it's I'm always kind of curious. Like, I don't know what you can say. Feel free to if you don't think you can say it's fine. But I'm always kind of curious about. I mean, because people want an investment, a return investment on their money, right? Do you mind to talk about kind of what you're offering to them, or is that against what you can talk about?
No, obviously. So, I mean, we're building Serverpod as an open source project, but people, when they build a server with Serverpod, I mean, they have the option to host it anywhere. It runs anywhere you can run Dart, which is pretty much any server, Linux, Windows, Mac, it runs. But what we're doing is building a hosting service for Serverpod, basically. So you enter your credit card number and your domain name, and we set everything up for you and basically take care of your hosting. So that's the business model, at least long term. So we won't be able to do that probably for the next 6 months or so, but hopefully we'll after that have a chance to pull that together and start working on that. So right now, just focusing on making Serverpod as good as it can be, and really, making it a great option for any Flutter developer to use as the backend. And I think the greatest benefit right now is that it allows you to use Dart for your whole stack, so you can very easily use Dart on your server. And yeah, then we built a bunch of innovations in there, like it actually analyzes your server code and generates your APIs for you from the server code. So we use the Dart analyzer for that. It builds the whole serialization layer for you. So we basically made it super easy to build your backend in Dart, and we solved a lot of the issues that are, pretty tough to do otherwise, like authentication. So we built authentication for Google and Apple and Firebase. So you can, with Firebase, obviously, get access to pretty much any other authentication method that you may need. But also, if you want to wing your own or use email, or you can do that too. So it's very flexible. So you can sort of pick and choose the parts that you need for your project there. And we built, file uploads, so you can do that efficiently. You can actually even pass binary objects in your method calls straight to the server. So there's a whole bunch of things in Serverpod that makes it very quick to build a real application. I think many of the other solutions that are out there for Dart right now, they're kind of limited to just the Dart layer, whereas Serverpod takes a more holistic approach and solve the sort of real issues that you eventually run into. So it can be really quick to get started building a project with many of these other tools, but when you probably need sign in with Google, and then you need to build all that yourself. Or if you, I don't know, start needing to do caching of your database objects, we have that ready to go in Serverpod, so it's very, very easy to integrate, rather than getting there and then you need to find another solution for that and start hooking that up. Can be a lot of work.
Yeah, I just want to say you have a fan out there in the audience who's saying he can't watch this episode live. At least he dropped by to leave a message, but
Yeah.
he's quote pretty excited about Serverpod, waiting for 1.0, right? So I just want to let you know that you have fans in the audience.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's coming really soon, the 1.0. It's out as a release candidate. Found a few smaller issues that we're working through right now, but it's there will be no major changes, so it's pretty safe, getting started with. And there are a whole bunch of projects out there already that is using Serverpod, not just Bus, of course, but they're I don't know. It's very hard to know how many actually, but there may be at least tens of them, maybe 100.
Yeah, and but are you because I just took a look at your roadmap, right? Your roadmap is hosted on GitHub. You can see the current
Right.
the way everything is. You got 60 done things. You have 5 main future features. These ones are not a part of 1.0, right?
Yeah.
But you have, you have 4 different 1.0 columns. Does that mean all 4 of these columns have to be empty for it to be considered 1.0?
I mean, I think we may probably leave 1 or 2 of those. So the nice to haves are things we're going to add if there's time. And then there's basically the essentials that we are for sure getting in there. So there are just a few remaining tasks. So essentials are pretty much, bugs left to go through. And we've been working a lot over the past couple of months making the documentation really good. There are a couple of YouTubers that started making tutorials for Serverpod, because I know a lot of people like to learn through YouTube, so we want to have that covered too.
That's awesome. Yeah, so like you said the binary file upload to database storage. So that's actually directly into the database, right? Not on the file system.
Right. So basically, we support file uploads out of the box in Serverpod, but then it's using the database. I mean, you can store binary files in the database. It may not be the best option for a real production app. So we also have support for S3. So basically, having it in the built into the database makes it very easy to set up and start working with. And then when you deploy it, you can actually deploy it to an S3 bucket, or like have the file uploads go to an S3 bucket instead, and that will be much more efficient. And it's just a better setup. But we support both. So there's still one bug if you're using Flutter Web and upload files to the database. That's not working right now. So that's one of the known bugs. So I think that's like a pretty limited use case, because it's maybe when you're debugging your application and still using the database for storage. But when you deploy your real application, it will work either way. So it's not a huge issue, but would be nice to get fixed.
You also have SQL querying for in list. So that means if you're querying for something in SQL using the in operator, right?
Right. So I haven't gone through that, but it seems like it would be a pretty easy thing to add. So might as well add it to the database layer. I mean, we have built an ORM that's basically makes it possible to pull rows from the database. They get like formatted as Dart objects, which is pretty neat. So you use sort of native Dart types. It really makes an abstraction of the database, but obviously you can do SQL calls directly to the database if you need to. So, but for most tasks, the ORM will work and be a very good solution and very easy to work with. So you can pull an object from the database and just pass it on to your app, and it will actually be both, serializable, and you can write it or read it from the database. So I think stuff like that is really what makes Serverpod great. It's like the sum of the parts is bigger than the parts themselves, because you can find all these parts, right? You can find an ORM for the database. You can use freeze to do your serialization. You can, use something else for caching. But bring all those together, and they just make sure all of the parts work together really smoothly. Makes for a really good developer experience. So some people think it's like they don't really like the opinionated nature of doing it that way. But I think in the future we may support other databases and stuff like that too. But for most people, working with Postgres will be good enough. It's what most apps use anyway, if they're not using Firebase or like document database. We did make some choices, but on the other hand, you get a whole bunch of stuff back from doing those choices. Like we added something we call future calls, which allows you to basically, say you have a user signing up to a service and you want to remind them 1 week from now by sending them an email. In Serverpod, you can just make a future call. So you say, call this method 1 week from now, and Serverpod just serializes that object to the database and pulls it up when it's ready to go. Things like that you can do, or like the caching, or just making those work really nicely together. It's things that you can't do with just pulling different parts together. Or we built a whole logging system around Serverpod, which we're going to release with the 1.0. We have a companion app to Serverpod that we call Serverpod Insights, which is basically a log viewer, a visual log viewer, where you can see your logs in real time, what's happening in your server. And if there's an exception, it will show up. You can click that exception and it just takes you straight to your code. It also, you can tell it to log your database queries, and you can set the logging on a very granular level. So you can say, turn on logging for a single method and turn that up to max, log everything that's happening in that method. And say there's a database query in there that is slow, you can find that one, you just click on that query, it's saved with the stack trace, so it will take you straight back to your code. So that's things that will save you, hours of debugging that you otherwise would have to get through. And we can do that because we tied everything together in one package, basically.
We got a question from the audience that I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So Robert Brunhage, I don't know if you know who he is. He's saying that Serverpod's type-safe API seems quite similar to TRPC. I've never heard TRPC before. I just looked it up.
I think, is he talking about GRPC or?
Yeah, not GRPC, T as in Tom, TRPC. Yes, was that something that sparked the interest to build Serverpod? So TRPC, the T I believe stands for type safe.
Yeah, okay. So I haven't seen TRPC. There's a package called GRPC too, which is
J
a
or
little
G?
bit G.
G. Okay, GRPC. Yeah, everybody I think knows that one from Google, right?
Right. Yeah. So Serverpod is somewhat similar to GRPC, but we're taking it one step further, where GRPC basically creates the protocols for your Dart code, or like your Go code or server code. What Serverpod will do will actually analyze the server code. So we have taken one step out of that whole process and made it a little bit more streamlined with Serverpod. But I'll definitely look into TRPC. I mean, it seems at the first glance maybe a little bit similar. So it's, I mean, everything in Serverpod is type safe. It supports null safety. It verifies your calls, so the data will be, good when it comes to the server. You start processing it.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, sometimes some of these things are so similar that it's just like, like kind of like, do you do Scrum? It's like, well, kind of. I don't necessarily release every week or every 2 weeks, but we kind of, we follow the principles of kind of like what is it? The 4 principles is like working software over documentation, these kind of simple things. But do we do Scrum? Not really, but it works. You don't have to follow everything to a T, right?
Right. I think there are like probably very many varieties of Scrum too. Subtle differences, and people love to call them different things.
Like I remember the guy Alan Key, he's the guy that, have you ever heard of Alan Key before? The computer scientist?
It sounds familiar, but I'm not like super familiar.
Okay. From what I understand, he kind of came up with the idea of object-oriented programming, but what we do now as object-oriented programming is not what he envisioned.
Yeah.
He envisioned more of a message passing, so basically kind of like Dart isolate kind of idea where you shoot messages across.
Yeah.
That's what he envisioned as object-oriented programming, but you can see if you look at Java, there's no message passing. It's just a free-for-all at times.
There's some languages that are more based on that principle, like Erlang, I think is a bit like that. It's sort of a server-side language made by Ericsson.
Erlang.
Yeah.
That's actually where the isolates came from. We had one of the creators on here and for Dart, and he said that they got the idea of isolates from Erlang.
Yeah, makes sense.
You cannot spin up like a millions of these isolates that you can in Erlang, but still the basic idea is like, yeah, you don't share data across isolates because it could be dangerous, right?
Right. I mean, that's a big problem, I would say, with like when you do server development in Java. If you do, it's easy to, at least if you do it on a lower level, to get deadlocks and not think about cases where, you write the same data in different threads, and keeping track of all that can be pretty challenging. Um, so I guess that's a benefit of Dart. That, that's way more structured, but also sometimes more limited, I guess, because you can't really pass objects between the isolates.
Yeah, I hear this sometimes about, it's a trade-off, right, between safety and um, convenience and being quick, right? Like how quick do you need to
Right.
be? I think I've seen some benchmarks of like Rust and Dart, and sometimes Dart actually beats Rust when you compile it in release mode, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Dart seem really fast. And something I really like about Dart is how like versatile it is. You can write as a scripting language basically, or you can compile it to native code, you can compile to JavaScript, or you can compile it to kernel code, which basically, I guess it's a little bit like Java bytecode, where it's really fast to start it up. It's sort of halfway compiled, but they haven't done the sort of native step.
Oh, you mean like the JIT? There's no JIT done yet, right?
Yeah, I guess. Or maybe, I don't know how much optimizations they have in that kernel code, but it's none of the sort of native code is.
Okay, sorry, not no AOT, basically no ahead of time compilation,
Right,
but you would have the JIT as it's running, which is kind of like how Java works, where it sees some pieces that it can optimize for your architecture, and then it just optimizes it as it's running, something like that, right?
right, right. So you basically have four different ways you can run it. And uh, yeah, for the most, that's a good thing. I think the JavaScript uh, sometimes is the most challenging to work with, even though that's where Dart started.
Yeah, it's Dart. It's just like it's very common for a startup to spin to do, what is the word again? You used the word earlier. My mind's going crazy. To pivot, right?
Yeah.
Just like companies pivot all the time. Like YouTube was a dating platform, I think, a video dating platform a long time ago, which is obviously,
Oh, wow.
well, maybe some people are doing that. I've seen some people asking for girlfriends on there, but that's another podcast, not this one. But like a lot of languages, they spin or they pivot, or they can pivot, right? In different ways. Like you look at Python 2 to 3, right? They had a huge pivot, not necessarily in what they were doing, but in their design. I think
Yeah.
Dart had big pivots, both in design, but also in what they were doing, right? First, it was okay. Can we like, what is the word? Can we write a better kind of JavaScript that will run faster compared to JavaScript?
Yeah.
And then that didn't really take off. Or can we just run this by itself? That definitely didn't take off, right? I think I remember that storm so many years ago. It's like more than 10 years ago, right? People were going crazy about it. And then it's like, well, can we use this for something else? Yeah, we can. I think to tools like LLVM and stuff, it's like it's not using LLVM, right? It's using something else. I forgot what it is. But tools like that where you can say, okay, run it for that thing, right? Run it for JavaScript, run it for that. It's crazy what you can do.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's cool. And I like Dart as a language. It's very nice to work with. Um, all the modern language features that you have access to, and the syntax is pretty nice. And that it's strictly typed, and the tooling around it's also really, really nice. So actually, I mean, the idea for Serverpod came out of me writing a server in Python, because I started using Python because of their sort of machine learning and text analysis libraries, which is really, really good in Python. But all the other parts is super painful to work with. So yeah, that's how I started thinking about doing this and just having everything in Dart, and started experimenting with that. And then, yeah, it became my full-time job. And now we have Serverpod.
Yeah, I was trying to see if there's like we were talking about Erlang earlier. There's a tool in Erlang built into the runtime where you can connect to a running instance and you can see all kinds of data like what's each core of your CPU running, how many processes or isolates in Dart language do you have running, what are they doing, and then you could start okay for this like imagine if you could say okay for this isolate run or log this function and show me what comes out, something like that. Like, but we don't have something so detailed built into Dart, but I know that we can hook into it, right?
I mean, that's definitely available in Dart, at least to some extent. With it was called the Observatory. Now it's, I think, DevTools. So when you start Dart, you can pass in a flag that is, I think, observe. Then it will start a web server, and you connect to that web server, and you get a whole lot of information out of it. You can like see exactly which objects are created. You can track memory leaks. You can see the isolates and what they're doing. You can do profiling in real time and stuff like that. So I mean that's I think pretty cool feature in Dart. I have no idea how it compares to Erlang. Maybe that's way better. I don't know. I haven't really worked with Erlang.
Yeah, no, I think they're similar, right? I haven't played around. I haven't had the need to play around too much with Dart and figure out what's going on. And also, yeah, I don't really write backends in Dart, although I've gotten quite a few people who are interested in having that. Like I tried doing something with Dart Frog because it's just straightforward and people were talking about it for a while. Serverpod just hasn't been popping up on my radar. I'm aware of it, but it hasn't been popping up on my radar in my circles.
Yeah,
Sorry to hurt your
that's all right.
feelings.
I mean, it's not released yet, so I mean, it's
Yeah,
just
it's been
the
out for a
people
while
are.
and you could use it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely now. It's I mean, it's so close to release, so it's. I think it's. I would say it's safe to start using it already, but I think Dart Frog. I haven't really done any sort of marketing or for Serverpod at all so far. So I mean, that's the next challenge now, to get it out to the community and have more people getting on board and trying it out, which is exciting, obviously. And uh, I think that's a little bit what drives me, is just seeing what people build with Serverpod, and that's really exciting.
I've never had the chance to play with Serverpod. I definitely will because I think I mentioned before we're doing the live stream with somebody, with Van Dad. I've heard of him before.
Oh yeah, I know of him. Yeah,
So we did a poll and it just beat out animations. So people are going for animations and it was for Dart, full stack Dart, and then finally it had full stack Dart, which I'm happy about because I think that's more exciting, more interesting topic because if you can build your app with Flutter, then why can't you continue the same language and build your backend with it? I don't think that's a good argument, but I think for people who are just starting out with this, if they know Dart, that's fine. But I don't think that should be the main or only reason to choose Serverpod or Dart Frog or something in Dart. But I want to explore it myself because I have people here who sometimes have free time and they don't know other languages. So it'd be nice to say, can you just build this something for me
yeah.
in Dart Frog? I asked him to build something in Dart Frog, but for me, it didn't feel complete yet, and he's really into Dart and Flutter, and it didn't seem something easy for him to pick up either. But I think also because he doesn't have the HTTP background to understand what's going to happen, and I think that's a positive for Serverpod because what I
Yeah.
understand is it does abstract things away, which for me as somebody who's more expert than somebody who only does Flutter, I feel like that is a hindrance and that makes me worried. But for somebody who doesn't, maybe it's okay, right? Like I just thrown some stuff out there.
Right. I mean, I think even for you, it will save you lots and lots of time if you start using it. But I mean, that being said, you have the option always in Serverpod to, I mean, you can hack together your own JSON interface. It actually, so Serverpod comes with both an app server where we sort of abstract everything, but you also have a web server which you can use to say you want to serve your Flutter app, your Flutter web apps, you can do that through Serverpod as well, or you can build way more complicated things. Or there can be use cases, for instance, where you need to connect to other web services, where you need to provide endpoints that has a specific format, right? Or webhooks and stuff like that. So we definitely allow that too. So you're not really limited using Serverpod to just, do it the Serverpod way. You can always do things your own way too. I think that's an important design decision to allow people to have the option to dig as deep as they want, but also make it really simple to use. And coming back to like using different languages, I think even if you're an experienced developer, being able to use the same language is huge. Because or if you're running, say, a startup or a bigger company and you have full stack developers, finding a good Flutter developer is hard enough, right? And if you need to have a Flutter developer that also knows Go or is fluent in JavaScript or whichever flavor of that you're using, that makes it even harder to find that developer, rather than having someone who is good at Flutter and Dart and they can just use that. And also when it comes to the context switches when you're working, it's much easier to jump between the server and the app if it's basically the same.
But now, I love to play devil's advocate. I don't know if you know that about me, but I always like
Yeah,
to throw out another side, right? So here's the other side, right? If I haven't looked, at least for a while, at Serverpod. Now I'm betting if you write a Flutter app versus if you write a Serverpod app, your coding style will be different, right? There's no build method for every single like service that you're going to be building, right? There's no bunch of widgets that you're going to be composing. So there is going to be some differences, yes?
I mean, obviously a server works different from an app, right? You don't have like a visual user interface in a server. But and you're still building the Flutter app the same way you would. It's just when you're calling the server, you do that. It looks like you're calling a native method or like a method in your app. So basically, what Serverpod will do, you create your methods on the server, and then it generates the whole API. So you get the library that you include in your Flutter app, and that has the same methods. So you can just call them and then return, a future with your result. I mean, it is pretty much the same. It's just obviously on the server side, you can't build a Flutter widget and pass that to the client. Not yet, anyway. Maybe that's something that could happen in the future if we can like serialize the widgets. But I don't really see. I don't know if that would be how useful that would be, but who knows? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that when I build a Flutter app, like, yeah, okay, technically it's still a Dart app, but I feel like Flutter, because the language and the way you do everything is so different than other programming languages, I just feel it's totally different when I'm writing a Flutter app. I have to call it a Flutter app because it's really quite different. For me at least, that's how I feel. But yeah, there's still Dart. There's still a lot of the stuff the same. It's building upon Dart, but like you don't have constructor calling constructor calling constructor calling another constructor calling another constructor, like this kind of style when you're building a Serverpod app, right?
I guess, I mean, that's a little bit of a characteristic of Flutter, I guess, like the build method gets very sort of nested with objects. Yeah, you typically won't get that too much on the server side, but maybe that's a good thing. I feel like maybe that's the biggest drawback of Flutter. It can be hard, especially in the beginning, to read those and also to write those, and when you need to refactor them. I was struggling a little bit when I started doing Flutter just with that, like when you have like this huge, build method and you need to pull out something and change the structure of that tree, like that can be a little bit daunting. But yeah, I mean, that thing will be the same regardless of which backend you're using, right? how you write your server code will be a little bit different from how you write your app code, but here it's the same language. And yeah, I mean, it's not that big of a difference. It's like when you write helper methods in your Flutter app that don't build a tree, they also don't have usually that much nested code.
Do we have an approximate date for when 1.0 will be out? I mean, obviously, you don't really know when you're going to fix these last essentials. So it's only the essentials that you're missing, and then you can say, okay, let's cut the release.
Yeah, so it will be in sometime in January. The actual date is not quite set yet for a couple of reasons, but basically the code is done or very, very close to being done. So yeah, I don't have an exact date, but it will be in January.
That's good. Can it be by January 12th? That's my birthday. Can you give me a birthday gift for that one? Then I'll try it out if it's on my birthday.
I'll give it a try. How about that?
Okay, so just delay the push. You can fix the
Yeah,
bug before, you can fix the feature before,
yeah.
just don't push it until then, okay?
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, but you're saying basically even there's how do I say this? There's no reason that people cannot be using this already in production as long as those two things are not stopping them. And you think that those are not showstoppers for basically at least 99% of people who could be using Serverpod, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's production ready right now, I would say.
Yeah, I think I remember like Linux a long time ago finally did like a 2.0 or 3.0 and everybody was like, wow, this is great. And then he just said like, I'm tired of being on one dot whatever or whatever it was. And do you remember this?
No, but
I think I remotely remember something. Yeah, he's just like, we just do the next one. Like kind of like versions, a long time ago things were different, but nowadays it's like everybody just pulls from master and then or main or whatever you want to call your develop branch and just runs that
right.
in production. There's like never any real reason to wait for 1.0 unless it's like breaking API changes. But you haven't had breaking API changes for some time, I'm guessing.
I mean, we made sure all those are coming before the 1.0 release. So, but yeah, there have been a few breaking changes that have been pretty big. We remade like the whole serialization layer, for instance. So that's a pretty big change. But I think worth it because now it's basically it's compatible with other. You can use freezed objects if you're using or like JSON serializable and stuff like that. So that works seamlessly with Serverpod now, which is pretty cool. And so I think it was worth doing those changes. But we wanted to get all those in before the 1.0 release. So there will be basically at least no bigger breaking changes until version 2, whenever that will be. But we have so many exciting things lined up for the future. It's going to be a very exciting year to come. I think the biggest thing we're starting working on now for what probably will be Serverpod 1.1 is database migrations. So I feel like that's the biggest pain point in Serverpod right now. You need to manually make sure that your database structure is, up to date. Being able to have that managed by Serverpod. I mean, it wouldn't be like hidden from you, but being able to basically get the migration files done and say like I want to run this next time I restart the server or whatever. I think that could be super useful.
That's a killer for me. If I don't know if I can use this one in production because that's a pain for me because I'm always trying to kick out new versions and always updating the database structure as I'm going along. But but that doesn't mean I can't try it.
Right.
But I'm saying that something that I really think about and it's really important because database is your central point of truth, right? If that's not tip top, then that gives me a little bit of a worry.
Right. So I mean, I think just getting that in there will be pretty huge, and something we really want to get right. But we couldn't make that happen for the 1.0, but it will definitely be there for the 1.1 in the future.
Okay, that's good to hear. I'm a bit surprised it's not in this one, but I understand there's priorities and everything
Yeah.
else. So
Yeah, I mean, still stable. You just need to make sure your database tables are up to par, and I'm sure there are other like third-party solutions you could potentially use for doing that already, but it would just be nice to have it built in, right?
I didn't find any decent like database structure stuff for migrations for Postgres compared to other places, but maybe I didn't look in the right places. I just typed in PostgreSQL, I saw like a basic connector where you
Yeah,
can send straight SQL queries, which is not interesting to me because I am worried about injections and stuff.
yeah,
And I saw some ORMs, and it's like I don't know if I really want to go for ORM style. I'm more of like into other kinds of patterns.
yeah. So I think this is something a lot of developers are struggling with, regardless of what framework they're using. So it would be really nice to have a good sort of built-in solution for that.
Somebody speaking about going back to the release date, somebody mentioned in the
Yeah,
chat that maybe you could do it on January 25th at the Flutter Forward event.
yeah, we'll see. Uh, yeah, it depends a little bit on how everything plays out with the last fixes and other marketing stuff that may or may not happen. We'll see.
So maybe if you can rattle off like maybe the top 3 to 5 features you think that people should know about Serverpod that will kind of make them come to use it compared to other kinds of solutions.
I think that it's just so seamless and easy to get started with. Is that one is really huge. You just the Serverpod create, and you have a whole project works out of the box with databases. If you want to use Redis for caching, it's built for scalability. So it comes with deployment scripts. You can deploy it to. Right now, we made them for AWS, but we're going to add more platforms in the future, and that's sets up a whole infrastructure for you with auto-scaling groups and load balancers, and if you want caching, staging servers. I mean, it's like the whole thing, basically everything you will need for building a real production quality server. So otherwise, for some of these other solutions, they may have like a deployment strategy, but it just deploys the server, right? There's so much more you need if you want to do things like file uploads, if you want to do, making sure it's correctly set up with certificates and load balancers and that it can scale. How do you connect your database properly? All that is just set up for you. So it's really a complete package for your server. And I think we covered probably 90% of all apps in what they need to do, and you can always add like those last 10% yourself if you need to. And then it's just really a smooth experience with rating your APIs, because it takes care of your whole sort of REST API. It has great support for streaming data as well. So we actually made a pretty cool demo called Pixorama.live. It's like a multi-user drawing experience inspired by Reddit places, if you've seen that, where you can basically you can be all persons can draw on the same canvas. It's like a pixel drawing app. So yeah, I think we covered most bases there, and yeah, those three, I would say, like the seamless experience is creating your APIs, and obviously using Dart as your main language, and getting the whole package to go and set up and ready and be ready to write your app, within minutes, versus having to connect all these parts, which can take days otherwise.
Yeah, so basically batteries included kind of framework ready to go. You just go with it. Yeah, everything you need is all right there for most things at least.
And I mean, just doing a proper deployment like that, that's a lot of work. Writing those scripts took like 3 weeks. Uh, it was kind of a painful experience. I haven't done that before, but you're so used with using Flutter and the hot reloads and stuff, and then you're using Terraform scripts on AWS, and every iteration takes like 5 minutes. So I think that's a different experience. And then it just says, "Oh no, something is wrong. You have to fix it. Try again. Wait another 5 minutes." So basically, we did all that trial and error and fixing it for all the other developers, so they can just get their server up and running in, I don't know, well, it'll take 15 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, I think you have to cover kind of the bare essentials of deployment, right? Nowadays, everybody deploys to Kubernetes. Of
Yeah,
course, you have other solutions. Bare metal, you can never forget about. That's always going to be something you have to be able to handle.
yeah,
Docker, but that's if you have Kubernetes, it's almost the same. I think it just shouldn't be much difference with Docker and Kubernetes to a certain extent.
right.
At least getting the image built. Some kind of like maybe Heroku, but that one you can use Docker. You can use some kind of build pack. I mean, I think those are probably the biggest things you need to kind of run, right?
Yeah,
And also, how to deploy with Firebase, etc. These are all going to be addressed, right?
right. Yeah. I mean, right now we have support for AWS and EC2 instances, but we're going to add more options there in the future for sure. And I think Google Cloud will probably be the next big one, and Kubernetes, because will be able to run that pretty much anywhere. So it would be also nice to be able to support that.
So for the Google Cloud one, are you looking at their version of EC2, which is what the compute server? I think I forgot what theirs is called.
Right. I don't know the exact naming of it, but yeah. Right now, I mean, Serverpod runs. You need to run a server. We are also going to look at more serverless, or what's it called? Maybe not serverless is not the right word, but microservices infrastructure you can use on AWS, for instance, or Google Cloud.
You're not talking about lambdas, right? You're talking about like, is it lambdas?
Yeah,
Okay, I thought you were going to be talking about, but that's also container based, right? There's another one. It's kind of like pre-Kubernetes. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I forgot the name now. Um, I can get the name in a second. Now it's going to bug me if I don't remember it.
yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? What that one is?
No, I'm not sure, but I mean there are many different options, and I think we just needed to start somewhere and make that work great, so you have a good option um, to get started, which will cover most of the users, and then we're going to just add more options in the future, and make sure. I think it's better to have a few options that works really, really well than covering too many and maybe not be like 100% on everyone, because there are like there are lots of things that you really need to cover when it comes to the deployment. It's not just getting the server up and running, but if you want to do file uploads, you need to be able to connect it to S3 or I guess data store in Google Cloud, and have that working all the way, not just on the server, but it needs to work all the way from your Flutter app. So we provide Flutter APIs for doing those things as well. So basically just call a method, upload a file on the Flutter side, and it takes care of all the steps in that process.
The thing I was trying to find before is called ECS, Elastic Container Service. I think it's called. That's what I think it stands for.
Okay, yeah. I think that's isn't that on AWS or?
Yeah, that's on AWS. So if it has the word elastic, most likely it's on AWS, including Elasticsearch.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It would be, guys. It would be. That's a huge feature, but like, if you can have some kind of Terraform like thing where you could say, okay, where do you want to deploy to? It's like, I don't know, just start throwing out things out there. Heroku, like Firebase, Google Cloud, AWS,
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, if you want AWS or Google Cloud, I don't know what it is for Google Cloud, but for AWS, okay, give us the IAM username and password or the secret key and whatever.
yeah,
And it kind of just does, it's like, okay, then it could be express setup where it just chooses a configuration that it thinks that you want, like you just tell which region.
yeah,
Or it could be, okay, do you want pro mode? And it's like, okay, do you want ECS? Do you want Kubernetes? Do you want blah 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 blah.
Right.
Like give you some that'd be kind of nice to have, but that is a huge endeavor to do because you got to support all these different things. But that would be really nice.
That's exactly how it works for AWS now. You basically get a configuration files where you can, set up things like what do you want, for instances, in which region do you want it to run, and so you have a sort of higher level configuration file that's all you need to configure. But then obviously you have all the other files that you can go in and play around with if you want to change anything in your setup.
Awesome. Yeah, you got a lot of stuff in there. I mean, you've been busy.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm always kind of curious, like how do you stay focused onto one thing? Because for me, I have a problem staying focused onto one thing. I've started too many things, and now I'm in the process of trying to close a couple of them at the same time, and it's not easy,
Yeah,
right? How do you stay so focused on one thing?
I have so many ideas for stuff I would want to build. Um, I just had to. I think I thought about all the different ideas that I had and thought like, what can I do the best? Where do I have the strongest network to build something? And I just went with it. And I sort of put all the other projects aside and made, Serverpod my hobby and work. And I think something that makes me passionate about working with something. I love building stuff, and I really love seeing people using the stuff that I build. So that's a big driver for me, and especially now when there are more and more people, starting to use it, giving feedback, uh, doing, work, new features, and everything. It's really fun to work with. So for me, it's yeah. There's a thousand other things I could have done, right? But you just have to focus on one and go for it. And I know this is something I can do really, really well. I mean, I have the experience. I'm a very seasoned Flutter developer. I actually used to work on the Flutter team at Google, so I've been really deep into Flutter. I built apps myself with Flutter and sort of felt the pain points that were there when it came to the backend. I built a bunch of different backends before, uh, both real-time apps. I built what became the world's third largest online poker. So I did like the um, server infrastructure for that, and all the real-time communication. Um, so yeah, I just felt this was the one idea where I had the most experience, network, and could pull everything together. So that's what I went for. And I guess, I mean, there's always days you're not like as motivated as others, but I mean, I love doing this, and I'm super happy with how it's came together. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's actually something I find very interesting. Is like I don't know if this works for all the other teams out there, but I feel like the Flutter team, if you ever leave Google, usually you leave, at least the people that I know that left Google that were involved with Flutter all left Google being in the Flutter team. There's only one guy I know who switched teams. He was kind of from the beginning of Flutter. He's working on something else. But otherwise, everybody else I can think of that I knew about that left the Flutter team actually also left Google at the same time. And I think all of them are still working with Flutter outside, except for maybe one guy who's not doing it full time, as far as I know. Right? That's oh, his face is in my head, but the guy who originally created Go Router, um, wow, what is the name? Is lost in my head. Um, he's working at Facebook now. Um, it's Eric, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's a couple of years since I left Google, so yeah, I think that not that many. The team probably looks very, very different now than it looked when I worked there.
Yeah, I was just trying to say, like, it seems like the people who were in Chris, sorry, somebody just got the name from me. Chris, if you remember who Chris is. I forgot. Chris Sells.
Yeah, yeah.
If you know who he was. Yeah. So he's the only one I know who's not working on Flutter full time outside of Google when he left. But he's still very much a part of the Flutter community, I would say nowadays, even though less than it used to be, but still part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably want to leverage the knowledge you gained at Flutter, at that team or at Google working there in some way. So it's, and I mean, the Flutter community, it's really growing fast. Uh, as technology, I mean, Tim Sneath said at Flutter Vikings, now 20% of all apps on, at least new apps, I'm guessing, on Google Play are made with Flutter. So it's, I mean, that's huge. And it's probably going to keep growing. I think we only just seen the beginning of Flutter so far.
Yeah, so that goes back to another question of mine: is when can we get to 100%? I mean, I kind of wish Android would go away already, but I guess there's a time and place for what you need Android for. But
Yeah,
the full
maybe.
Google Flutter has. I always feel it kind of weird. Like there's sometimes you have these kind of competing things, right? There's a couple of OSs, I believe, within Google. Now there's basically two kinds of ways to build apps. Android and Flutter for Android apps, or sorry, native Android and Flutter.
Yeah,
I'm just like, can we just kill Android and just go with Flutter? Because I've heard very few people that tried Flutter and stuck with Android. Very few. I can't tell you even one, but I'm sure there's some.
yeah. I mean, I feel like I had the worst developer experience with any sort of Android apps that I tried to make. It's not that, and it's also very hard because you run into some issue and you start Googling and you get like information that's maybe 2 years old, and everything has changed since then. In some subtle ways, and you need some compatibility libraries or whatnot, and it just feels like so messy. Um, yeah, no, yeah, I agree. But Google is pretty good at having many different projects around the same topic, I would say. I mean, it's not like Flutter and native Android are their only frameworks for doing UI, right? They had at least had Polymer, and they had there's some other material design library for HTML. No, I can't remember the name right now, top of my head, but yeah, so that's been a bunch.
Polymer, wow, you take me back to, what is that, 15 years ago now?
Yeah,
It's been a
probably.
long time. It's been a long time. At least 10 years, I think.
Yeah, but it was probably supported for longer than that. It's not like it's been dead for 10 years.
I think the thing is with web, once it comes out and it's been used, you can't not support it. It's like it's gonna always be there.
Yeah,
Like the very first web pages are still accessible today.
yeah,
They have to be. It's not nice, you know. And that's you go to the page source and you see like font tags, and I don't remember what else there was back then. I don't know. Eyes are still being used, right? Yeah, bold tags and everything is capitalized and all long doc type and everything else.
yeah. Blink.
Oh yeah. My favorite blink tag, marquee tag. There we go. Marquee is a big one. I remember when I was younger, like you'd have fun at inserting marquee and like blink. Yeah, you do blink tag, and you'd show it to your friend, and then they would say, nothing, it's not blinking," and you're like, "Well, you have to use Firefox, man. Why are you still using IE? Then you'll see it blinking."
Right. Yeah, there were times.
Yeah, don't you miss those days when incompatibilities? At least now life is a little bit easier since everybody nearly switched over to Chrome or Chrome compatibility.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that is true. It's probably way easier to build a decent web page nowadays.
I feel like an old man. Like, you guys don't know what it's like. Like I showed somebody how to convert a number to a string where you just add an empty string to it, and people felt like that was horrible. And I'm like, what are you talking about? That's what you had to do back in the day if you wanted a string. You had to add an empty string to it from a number. Then you had a string. And they just feel like so dirty. Like, no, that, like, I think nowadays there's other ways you could do it, but back then that was the only way that I knew how to do, and that was like the main solution.
Yeah,
And I just feel like nowadays, like I feel like an old man, like, oh, you kids these days, you don't know what life was like back then, adding empty strings to numbers to make strings.
Yeah. No, it's happened quite a few things since then. I think it would be hard to go back and program in C and Emacs and
Oh, Emacs is coming back. Everybody's talking about Emacs for the last couple of years. They're still talking about it. I forgot what is the main. Is it Space Max? That's the one everybody's been talking about.
might need to check it out. Yeah.
Yeah, Emacs is coming back. All of a sudden, it's coming back now. Vim is out now. There's Nim or something. I don't know. I run out. I stick to IntelliJ and VS Code. I don't want to get any more than that. That's enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Switch to VS Code. I think it's pretty neat. I like it. And especially, I think the biggest innovation is probably all those the real-time code analyzer compared to when I started programming. You had to like compile your program to see if you had made any typing mistakes in there.
Oh yeah, yeah. Now you can have like a pre-compiler that would be compiling your code and like I said, linting it or whatever as you're typing, so you can find all the stuff.
Yeah, and that's stuff that you weren't used to back in the day, but happy things evolve.
Yeah, but now if that stuff stops working, at least you can continue to work because you know what it's like to work back then, as opposed there's sometimes when I don't remember. There's sometimes where some tools just stop working and people kind of freak out. At least some of my colleagues, they kind of freak out like, oh, I don't know how do I continue? I'm like, what do you, how do you continue? It's just code. You just write. It's just a text document, man. Just write it and then you know read it and see if it works. Don't just like once IntelliSense stops working, some people just don't know how to work. If you're writing Java, okay, I think that's true. It's hard to write Java without IntelliSense because some of those names of classes and everything else is ridiculously long, all
Yeah,
the
true.
boilerplate. But most other languages, especially Python and Dart and some JavaScript, is you don't really need it. You can do most of it yourself.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. There's much less to keep in your head now with like proper autocomplete and things like that.
Okay, cool. We've been on started a little bit late, but I think we a little bit over planned time and definitely over the calendar invite time. And I appreciate taking up your time. So 1.0 is coming out in January. Let's just make that part clear. So, how do we stay up to date to know when it drops? Is there a Twitter account that we should follow, or how do we kind of keep up to date?
Yeah, so either Twitter is good, Serverpod dev, it's the account there, or if you go to serverpod.news, you can sign up for a newsletter, so you'll get all the information there, obviously. So I think, and obviously serverpod.dev, the main web page. Those are the best ways to find us.
So, is it serverpod.news? You said you can get to the newsletter?
Yeah.
Yep, that's right. It's a separate domain name. I didn't see a link on the Serverpod page. That's why I was a little bit confused.
Yeah, I should add that. So you can find it on GitHub, I think, but should link it from the documentation and from Serverpod too.
Okay, I just signed up so that way I can keep up to date. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too.
Of course, you're looking forward to the fruits of your labor. It's been several years, right?
Yeah, not several, but I've been working full time at least 1 year on this project, and for probably 1.5 years in total.
Okay, I thought it was a lot longer than that. But, you just figured there'd be a lot more things to do. But I guess if you are motivated, it could be a lot faster.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, lots of work, and has really gone into this project. So I'm excited to see people starting using it, and yeah, I just love to see what people are building with Serverpod, and hope it can be a huge help to the whole Flutter community.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Again, it's great to have you on. I'm looking forward to 1.0 coming in. I think for 1.1, when that one comes out, maybe we should have another talk and see how the database stuff is going and everything else that's in that one. That'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that for sure.
Sorry, I just saw an interesting question.
All right.
I, he, I think it's pronounced Abdullah Al Mahmoud, or hopefully I said that Mahmoud. Sorry, apologies if I butchered your name. He asked, "Is the name Serverpod inspired from Riverpod?"
So it's I think I came up with a Serverpod name before Riverpod, so there's like no connection there. Yeah, no, that's just a coincidence.
Now, where'd the pod part come from?
So, from the beginning, it was kind of I just used it as a temporary name, and then it kind of stuck with people. So, and I figured it's not too bad of a name. I'm thinking like pod is like a rocket, something you can build, but it's also something that's contained in one neat package. So those were my sort of associations around Serverpod. But people remember it. It's easy to spell, pronounce. So I just figured, yeah, why not? I'm Serverpod now.
Okay, and then his obviously is not from you, right? I think his name came from provider spelled backwards, which is interesting.
Right.
Sometimes it's like that. Like we were talking about, like how you the obviously, because I know so much about Erlang Elixir because I use them every day.
Yeah.
Erlang, they kind of came up with a lot of ideas that are kind of became popular as time came on. Like message passing, right? Back then, nobody was doing message passing, as far as I know, and they thought, yeah, this is obvious. And then now you have like Dart isolates doing the same thing. You have a couple of
Yeah.
other kind of design patterns in the actor pattern, right? Sorry, actually specifically talk about actor pattern. They were doing some sort of actor pattern before they even heard the term actor pattern, and you just happens. Like TRPC seems so much similar to GRPC, right? Or
Yeah.
at first glance, so it just kind of comes up, and people have just the same idea or same solution or similar solution.
Yeah. I mean, often it's like the most obvious ones people will do them, or there's just so many ways you can solve a problem in nice ways.
There's only so many names for products, right? So we should all just attach pod to whatever.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I have another microphone over here called a pod mic, so
There you
maybe
go.
related. It should have
Might
been called
be.
Mic Pod, then it would have made more sense.
Yeah, no, I feel reasonably happy with the name. And, I had some friends help me with the branding and stuff, and I think that turned out great too. So yeah, I think it works.
Well, the hardest part of, but there's always a couple of hard things in computer science and programming, right? It was like caching and threading, I think, is another one, and that you're here, but also naming things is probably one of the hardest ones.
Yeah, probably.
We started a new project that we hope to finish up soon, and I think that one took about two weeks, and we've only spent 1 week on the project actually doing work, because we're like, well, what do you want to call it? Because we have to like create the project template, and we cannot do that without a name. Okay, we'll just come up with something right now.
Right. Yes, I'm Serverpod. Obviously, I just spent like a day or like a couple of hours writing down ideas for names. And it's not just you need a good name; you need something that isn't used already too. That's makes it even harder, right?
Oh yeah, so many companies come up with a name, and then they like they want to buy the domain name from somebody, and then the guy is just like, oh, I see, I've parked this domain name for a long time, this is good for me. And they see that coming in.
Yeah, I think that happens a lot.
Okay, again, thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time, and sorry to keep you waiting, and everybody else who joined the show and the audience, keep you guys waiting. I'm looking forward to this episode coming out. Hopefully it comes out around the same time, so we can bring you guys some more traffic.
All right, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you for having me again. And yeah, I'd love to be back with a 1.1 release too.
Don't come back to me without proper database migration verification. Okay, I'm looking now. You put that on my my list. It'll be there. Okay,
Yeah.
that's my requirement now.
All right, fair enough.
Awesome. Thanks.